Was to make something, and the team we've got up here probably made what was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, grassroots alternate reality game of the past year. I had a lot of fun watching this, and I'm going to have a lot more fun hearing about it.
Expectations?
Yeah, no pressure.
Hi everybody, and welcome to Killing Adele, which we will explain, or we'll get to it. You know. So I'm Dana Shaw. I was the creative director. I led the team for The Wall Will Fall, and everyone else, why don't you start off by introducing yourselves?
Hello, I'm Connor Fallon. I was the game design lead on The Wall Will Fall, so I was responsible for making sure that the narrative and all the interactions were cohesive and nicely integrated.
I'm Eric Kays, and I was the interactivity lead, kind of also blending the narrative and interactivity together in the game.
I'm Tom Pike. I was the story design lead, so my job was to be the lore master, keep track of all of the insanely complicated world building that we were doing and make sure that we didn't contradict each other, which we did end up doing a few times. That was fun. That was my job to clean up the mess.
It's worth noting that most of our titles are lies, as we all did a little bit of everything, but that's the gist of it.
So we are here to talk to you today about tailoring your game to your players, not the audience that you have imagined will be playing your game before you actually get it there. Because that's something that we had to do a lot with our game. So why don't we start off by explaining what The Wall Will Fall is.
So The Wall Will Fall is about the fourth wall separating fiction and reality. The wall has cracked, and fictional characters from classic works of literature have started pouring through. People like Sherlock Holmes and Romeo and Juliet. And it is the job of the players to send them back, or they are told if the fictional characters stay in reality, they will be endangering everyone who lives in reality.
Reality will collapse.
But at the same time, there are characters who don't want to go back. So there was a moral quandary that we just kind of seeded in there. So so why don't we talk a little bit about the early stages of releasing the game? Like, what would you guys say was our first observation that what we were doing wasn't the best idea?
She's referring to our launch. If you are going to launch a game, do it better than we did. We were sponsored by a site called TV Tropes. It's a wiki about fiction. Much like Wikipedia, if you go on there, it'll cause an explosion of tabs. It's much beloved by the people who use it. We had our launch as a banner on the top of the page that said, "Here's a very grave announcement." Of course, about the future of reality was the implication. And it was this ominous video by this guy you've seen, the guy who stands in a white void with the top of his head chopped off. It's that guy talking to the camera with this filter applied to his voice, and it was very scary. And some people who didn't know what an ARG was thought it meant that the website was being taken down, which to them was more scary than the possibility that reality could end. So the launch got a little bit of a backlash, mostly because people were just confused and disoriented. And eventually we edited out the word grave and we tweaked the way we presented it, and then people were okay with it. But that would be what I would say would be the biggest mistake I would avoid would be don't completely confuse people at your launch.
I mean, this was really the first clue. So our audience, we had certain elements of our game that were very adherent to the traditional ARG rule of this is not a game, right? Like hide the links at all possible times. Our audience, while very fiction savvy, was less ARG savvy. So this was the first instance of that being like, wait, okay, like we definitely want to take advantage of ARG elements and have them throughout, but don't give people heart attacks.
We realized that our players, we didn't want to scare them to the point that they weren't going to join the game, which unfortunately our launch did. It dissuaded some people because they were angry at us. They were just like, well, I thought that this was, the whole website was going down, and that's your fault. So this really cool thing that I bet will be cool, nope, not doing it. So that was when we first realized, okay, maybe we should shift some things around. Maybe we should learn a little from the way that our players are actually coming at the material that we're giving them. And I think the first big shift that we made was when we first had the announcement up that the wall was falling. We had our players very frustrated that they, at that point in the game, were supposed to be observers. That stage of the game, it was supposed to be like a slow ramping up.
They wanted to get started right away.
They wanted to get started. So they said, well, okay, why can't we make something to protect the wall? It's fiction, right? Like, and there are fictional characters coming out. Can we create a fictional character? And so that's when the meta guards were born.
Some brief background on that. From the very beginning of the game, because the game was all about fiction and fictional characters breaking in, one of our core mechanics was that in order to send these characters back, you had to write stories about these characters. So like, basically what would happen is, it's TV tropes, it's a website that breaks down tropes, and in those are basically narrative devices. And as the game went on, different characters would leave behind echoes of what they were doing, which contained a trope, and these would end up being keys that you had to involve in the story that you were writing about them to send them back. So what we did is we saw this thing that we were already planning to do, and the players wanted to be involved in a more cohesive way at that point. And they're like, hey, can we somehow like create a character that will stand on the other side of the wall and prevent people from crossing, basically. And we saw this, and we were like, that suggestion gives us an excuse to basically prototype this story writing process. And so we had them write these stories. I'm really hoping that
There's
the picture.
quotes from them up there,
Yeah,
actually. That's one of them there.
That was
That's from one of the, that is, the previous one was a quote from a story that a player wrote.
Yeah, but we essentially ended up, we told them, hey, submit stories about these characters that you've written, and then we'll pick the best ones, and they will become the guardians that stand behind the wall to try to prevent fictional characters from crossing. And they became a major part of the game that hadn't existed until then.
Here's the thing about alternate reality games as I see it. ARGs are a conversation. They're a game of improv. They're not a novel where it's one person with a loudspeaker talking at a bunch of people,
Not that
kind of like
novels
right
are
now.
bad.
It's just different. So in improv, they have a rule called yes and. If your scene partner establishes something, you roll with it and you add to it. And when they told us this, it was them saying yes and, you've established this world, this seems like it fits in this world, can we do this? Now, even if we hadn't been trying to prime that exact skill for later in the game, which we were, even if that were the case, the world that we'd set up, what they were asking us to do, it made perfect sense. If we had said no, it wouldn't have made sense anymore. And it didn't require a lot of work from us, and it would have been a lot of fun for them. So, heck yes, invent fictional characters that'll stand on the other side of the wall.
So basically, you know, what we did is our players came to us and asked if they could be more involved. So, you know, we did what we could do, and that actually wound up influencing the way that the entire climax of our story played out. So something that the players introduced in Act 1 changed Act 5 completely. So it was pretty incredible as far as the amount of work we had to do to make that happen, but it was really rewarding for both us and for our players. So one other thing that I'd like to discuss is we had plans for there to be this moral quandary that I had spoken about before, specifically between the group of characters that want to stay. They were called the CABAL, because that's the name they chose for themselves. They were made up of Moriarty, of Morgan Le Fay, the Phantom of the Opera, and Don Juan. So they don't really sound like they're going to be a big group of nice people. And they wanted to stay because this was the first time that they had had what they would, you know, equate with free will. They didn't have a story to go to go on, a path to follow. This was their first time making their own path, and they were quite happy with that. But we had another side, which was the side of Mr. Administrator, the guy with, you know, you can only see part of his face, and he was a character who was known to lie, and he said, no, you guys can't stay because reality might fall apart, possibly, perhaps. And those qualifications were only added after our players poked and poked and poked and said, are you sure it will fall apart? And he was like, possibly.
So they had to make this complicated moral choice on incomplete information.
And we expected them to divide into camps. We expected there to be some people who really supported the Cabal and some people who really supported Mr. Administrator. And we had our core mechanics built around this. Do you guys want to explain what that was? Eric, you want to take this?
No.
Okay.
I was not as heavily involved in this section of the game, actually.
Liar. He just doesn't want to speak. Go. Fine, fine. So our original endgame, I guess the best way to talk about that is the original endgame.
Yeah.
Was that there was we were kind of building the game up to a race where players who were on one side would be collecting the fourth wall pieces, and you'd be using it to try to seal the wall before all the characters were sent back. And players on the other side were trying to collect the echoes, which were these comics, the comics that contain the tropes, so that the stories could be written and the characters could be sent back as soon as possible. And we kind of balanced this so that the wall pieces had like more complicated puzzles and required like more global, while the echoes were also global but easier to obtain.
This was a scavenger hunt in the real world.
Yeah, basically. But what happened is our players, despite being internally conflicted and believing different things, because we had like our original plan was for a much larger active player base than we wound up with. Our group was determined to stay united, even if they disagreed like internally, and that resulted in a lot, basically an impasse, where things got really heated between our players about what was the right thing to do.
But they were all friends with each other, and they were having these heart-to-heart, like, spirited debates, and then like, oh, it's okay, come hug, and they'd make up, and they'd be no closer to picking one side or another.
And then something would happen, and they'd start fighting again, and then they like friends.
But they wanted to be friends. They wanted to be one community, and we realized that our original climax, which was the race ending, was going to be unsatisfying for the winners and for the losers. So we changed everything with 8 days to go. We wrote
It was a race between us and the players, basically, at the end, to see if we could get it done before they finished the game.
Quickly, this was one of the meta guards that
was
they
one of the characters they
created.
invented.
This is the Cabal, and one of the wall pieces, actually.
Oh, so quick story actually about this slide, just for a quick example of modifying our game for our players. Oh, it's
There we
gone.
go.
Oh
There
yeah.
we go.
So one of the things our players did was they created a chat room in addition to the forum that we created for them to hang out and talk.
Because they're friends, they like each other.
Yeah. But when we sometimes drop in to, see what they're talking about, and we saw that there's this pattern where they were constantly, and like, anytime there was a new member, they were worried that it was a Cabal member in disguise.
And we didn't want them to have to question every single person who was coming in.
And-
So we figured what we should do is show them that if a member of the Cabal is gonna come into your chat room, you're gonna know.
So, and one of the things was at this point we were also looking for a way to open up communication between the Cabal and the players, because one of the advantages that Mr. Administrator had was that he was in constant communication with them, and Morgan Le Fay and the others were not. So we had Morgan Le Fay enter their chat room and start talking to them, and they freaked out, and it was awesome. Yeah, I like it when they freak out.
Figure out how to move on to the next slide anymore, so we're still doing this for a while. Anyway, getting back to the climax though, which is that's I think the real big takeaway from this, which is if your players are asking for something, even if it seems like it's going to require an insane amount of manpower, an insane amount of work, if it's what they need, it's what they deserve, especially if they put in 3.5 months of solving your stupid puzzles. So all through the game, they had been saying, what if Cthulhu shows up? And we'd been sitting there thinking, no, he's not gonna do that, it's not public domain. And then we looked into it and realized that it's actually public domain. And we're like, well, Cthulhu is one of those characters that, if you say his name enough, it kind of calls him, doesn't it?
And then we went, hey, you know, you also have those Vanguard characters that you created that would probably try and stop him before he comes out into reality. What can we do with all of these things?
So our end game became, you remember those fics you guys have been writing? Well, you guys now have to write a fic where these 4 guys you put on the other side of the wall have to stop an elder god from entering the real world. And also one of you, the players, has to volunteer for a suicide mission. And we expected that to, I don't know what we expected, but we did not expect everyone.
We expected deterrence.
Everyone volunteered.
We had 13 people running in that poll, all volunteering to basically possibly die in the world of our game.
We tried to make it clear, like, there's real danger, guys. You're gonna really fight Cthulhu. We tried to like amp that up, and they did not. They kept giving speeches. They wanted this thing.
Yeah.
They wanted the honor of dying fighting Cthulhu.
What they didn't realize is that the honor of fighting Cthulhu could only be done by someone who had a webcam / smartphone, and many of them didn't. So we had to go to the players who did and say, hey, this might be a thing that you are qualified to do. Congratulations! Please win.
So the task at hand for the player who won this dubious honor was Mr. Administrator would give them a special smartphone app that would shoot lasers at Cthulhu. And of course the production on this app was as rushed as everything else. It wasn't a real app. But we posted screenshots of the app that didn't really exist, and they were covered in all these weird symbols and nonsense, and everyone tried to parse out, what's the meaning? And the player who
I want to throw this out because we're filming this for our players. It was a real app.
Oh yeah, it was totally real. But the player who was filming it
Tom just doesn't know.
has now signed a non-disclosure agreement and was on our side of the curtain and was telling people, yeah, like I'm really trying to figure it out, and they believed that it was real. And the climax became he walks into a field with this app, the sky opens up. We have a shot of it, but I've completely lost control of the PowerPoint at this point. The sky opens up and Cthulhu comes out, and there's this 1.5-minute video of the player fighting Cthulhu that we aired live. That was live.
On a live stream, yeah.
And we had to make that whole video, write it, shoot it, and add CG in 8 days. So that was insane. But what it resulted in, like, and the CABAL shows up briefly to fight Cthulhu as well. Like it was this unified ending, right? Where both the good guys and the bad guys, however you saw it, because they were all morally great characters, they were all on the same side, even if they didn't completely trust each other.
Yes, so that is how we completely broke our game apart and gave it to our players in a form that they were going to enjoy more than the original game we planned. And there were some more pieces in there that I think we could talk about, specifically the phone puzzle. We gave our players a therapist's phone number. They knew who the therapist was. They did not know who her patient was that she was writing about because, you know, she's a therapist. It's all in confidence. And we gave them a phone number and left them to their devices expecting them to hack into her voicemail because that's what we had set it up to do.
I just want to know, who would do that immediately? Who would hack into a phone immediately in a game? You know it's game, you know it's fiction. I mean, come on. No one wanted to. It's a legal thing apparently. You can't hack into a phone.
And they were playing on 2 levels. They were playing on the level where they were meta, and they were like, this is a game, this is what we're supposed to do. But they were also playing on a very personal level, in game, where they said, but that's not how I want to play. That is not the type of person that I am. And also this is illegal and I want to respect this therapist's privacy, fictional or not.
It took us like 2 days to convince them to do this. How did we do that?
I would argue that this was a case where we actually failed to
Yes.
modify the game, and it was one of the most stressful points of the game. It really became an example of what not to do going forward.
Because we had designed this in such a way that they would not be able to get the information in another way. We weren't we were too into the puzzle already.
Also, those voicemails were awesome.
That too, but we were too far in to pull out. We not only didn't have time to do something else, but we had negative time to do something else. So our only option there was to push forward. And that was probably one of the least fun moments for our players and for us, because they really did not want to go forward with that. It made them very uncomfortable.
Once they did, it was awesome. But this ties back in with what we were talking about earlier with the stories. When they wanted to write stories, and we're like, that's great, that prepares them for later. I think one of the things that's crucial to have in a game is little trainer puzzles. In Portal, they give you one gun before they give you two. Because if you just watch an expert play Portal, you've never played Portal, it just looks like a person spinning around in circles and it makes no sense. But if you start people with trainer wheels, then they can intuit it and it makes sense. And we needed a trainer puzzle for this puzzle, and we didn't have trainer puzzles. We had trainer, and we realized that on this puzzle, and we changed a lot of our later stuff to gradually amp up in complexity.
This is, I think, where we learned the lessons that we needed to learn in order to be able to throw out our original ending. Because this came maybe at the 1/3 mark into the game, and we realized that if we were going to go forward with this, we had 3 more months with these people. We needed to be able to give them a game that they were going to play. So looking forward, that's what we tried to do. Do you guys have any other things you want to talk about? Anything else you want to throw out there?
Well, I think we should explain the title real quick. Adele is not the singer, that's the handle of the player that volunteered to die. And we call the panel Killing Adele because when we had him sign the non-disclosure agreement, which didn't happen, it was all completely real. When we had him sign that, we were like, look, there is a fail condition here. Failure is very possible. Your teammates have to back you up. They have to write these fics about defeating Cthulhu. There were other minor tasks that they had to perform. But this is a team effort that you are a key part of. But if they do not succeed, then you are dead. You can't post on this forum anymore. We're really sorry to take this away from you, but I hope they don't let you down. And in the end, we had a deadline, and we had people submitting up, they had fought 4 or 5 times exceeded the goal that we'd set with an hour to go. And then we had players submitting haiku after that. If you get to the 5-minute mark and it starts getting shorter and shorter, we got one 30 seconds before that was just Cthulhu lost. And, so it all helped.
In all of this, our whole goal was to make this entertaining for the player specifically, and I think that if we had a mindset of just creating a game, for ourselves, technically for the players, but for ourselves, I don't think that any of the changes that we did make, would have been as good in the long run. I had this whole thing in my head that I was rehearsing just 30 seconds ago. We all want to make, that one thing, that one story, that one game that is, close to us and everything, but in the end, the one thing that makes this whole thing, I think, different from a lot of stuff that's previously been made that may or may not have worked is that we focus specifically on the players, and whether that was modifying a previous plan to just send packages to only advertise at different businesses and news sources, and then sending them to the players later on, or having the players fight Cthulhu specifically. It was all about the players from the beginning, and without that mindset, none of this would have been as entertaining or fun to the players as it ended up being for them.
That's really true. Eric is touching on something that we were designing a game that from the beginning was supposed to be influenced by the players. If it was supposed to be a straight railroaded shot through, I don't know that our modifications would have made sense. But we were modifying something that was intended to be a roadmap and not a blueprint. From the beginning, we planned on the refictionalization being the method of sending them back. The players write the end of each character's story. So we knew that the last plot point was going to be determined by not us already.
There were some great minor bits of improv, which I don't think we have time to go into, but I will, like we had two characters that were very close to each other, and I just want to touch upon that one very quickly. Long John Silver and Gulliver were travel buddies, unlikely travel buddies. And one of the things was, because Long John Silver is stupid, he didn't actually write blog posts, he wrote like journal entries on paper and then had Long John Silver take pictures of them and
Gulliver
upload them
wrote
to the
this.
internet, yes.
Gulliver
wrote
had
those.
wrote them out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so basically the players had no direct communication with Gulliver. So when it came time to try to send Gulliver back, they were not sure how.